Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, Technical Agronomist for Cooperative Farmers Elevator, and on this week's Field Friday segment, I thought we'd talk about maybe one of the next decisions we have to make with our corn crop, given the stage that we're at and what the calendar date's telling us. If we look at what's going on in this corn right now, depends on planting date. There's obviously a wide variation of that, but we're getting some of these fields are getting up towards the time where we got to make that decision. Are we going to apply a fungicide or not this year? I get it. There's an awful depressed commodity price environment right now. We maybe are done investing money on this crop, and there are some decisions that have to be made on that. But there also are some decisions on some of these better fields and potential high responding type situations where a fungicide still is going to be a profitable application. Last year there wasn't a lot of fungicides applied either, but the ones that had fungicide, especially field level trials, I hear a lot of 15 to 30 bushel yield responses, also some increased standability. That could still be profitable even with $3 corn, and it's definitely something to consider. Some of the management decisions that we're trying to make here, we've got a whole different environment this year, and this could be a factor that might drive us towards that decision of applying a fungicide on some of these fields. With that, we're going to have a really damp canopy environment, more damp than normal, and that's going to lead to more potential diseases. We've applied fungicides for a lot of years, kind of banking on the plant health effect, not really staving off a lot of disease pressure, because usually that's more common as we get into southern Iowa and into farther southern environments. But we could actually have more disease pressure here this year than we normally have. With the damp environment we've had, northern corn leaf blight could be a factor, gray leaf spot could be a factor. Gray leaf spot's typically a bigger deal further south, but our environment's acting like a further south environment this year, so that could be a factor we might have to deal with. The rust, southern rust, common rust, they typically blow up in the southern air currents from the south. They don't overwinter here, but we've had enough southern wind currents where we could definitely have those show up, and we'll see as time goes on which of those we have to deal with. All of those can be helped with a fungicide application. Something else the fungicides actually do help us with is, we've used this plant health term before, but it does some things internally to that plant that kind of could help us out. It makes that corn plant maybe a little bit more efficient with nitrogen that it takes up. If we're going to run short, that obviously could be a benefit without any additional application. It's not like replacing 50 units of supplemental nitrogen application. It's not that much of a benefit, and it's not that good, but every little bit we have help might be a positive this year. If we start running out of nitrogen and we have more diseases in this damp canopy, and also with these saturated soils, that could also hurt some of the root development and root growth. We could have crown rot from all those factors start to set in on that corn plant as it starts to fill grain later on towards the end of the season. All those things are going to hurt standability. We could probably get some benefit from these fungicides by staving off a little bit of that and adding to that rind strength to try and help keep that plant standing as long as we can. There's a big difference in hybrids' response to fungicides. Obviously, stock standability is going to be something you want to evaluate. If we can help that on those hybrids that don't have that as a strength, that's a plus. But we need to think about those things in making these decisions. When we're applying these fungicides, we do have the option to throw in some foliar micronutrients, or probably this year, more importantly, we do have the potential to throw in some foliar nitrogen. Those are things we need to evaluate in the situations you're in. The key to determining the timing of the fungicides, of course, is we want to have the field all tasseled as best we can. If we have that field all tasseled, that's the safest and the most responsive time to have that fungicide application done. If we apply it too early, there was some discussion when fungicides first became popular about something called arrested ear syndrome, and first it was thought the fungicides were doing that on the earlier applications prior to tassel. Winfield's answer plot system has actually done some research on that, and they've got a pretty good database that basically states that it's not the fungicide at all that's doing it. It was the adjuvants that are with it. There's non-ionic surfactants that are out there that applied prior to tassel can do that damage to that ear and really cost you some yield. We know which adjuvants are a problem, which ones aren't, so that's kind of important to know. Ideally, we'd like to wait for that field to be all tasseled, but with all this water and all this unevenness in some of these fields, we might have 90% of the field tasseled and the last 10% won't for a while. We can feel confident that we can apply the fungicide and not damage that 10% of the field, and that's important to know and important to do for this year with the variability that we have. And the way this weather pattern has been, we're getting probably that new leaf to unroll maybe every 2 to 3 days. So we're looking at some of this stuff is a week away from maybe having tassels emerge. We had a month's time for planting. We probably started and took us a month to get everything in most part, maybe in 5 weeks in some areas. So we'll probably have maybe 3 weeks of tassel emergence difference in timing potentially. So that's one way we can go out and evaluate where that timing might fall in. But something we definitely need to consider. We've got a lot going against this crop this year. This is one last step we can do to try and help that corn crop out. So with that, that's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.